Okay, everyone. Hey, welcome to the first live stream. I don't know why I decided to do this, but I don't know. I thought it'd be fun. So today we're going to be responding to, or at least watching and listening to, How to Answer the Problem of Evil in 5 Steps by Mike Winger. I've listened to this one a couple of times, and I just feel like I don't know. Maybe there's other people that have already responded to this that are just better at it. I don't know, but I thought I'd give my 2 cents into this video since I kind of find it very frustrating and somewhat annoying. So anyway, let's get started.
With the problem of evil, and that is the problem of bad things, that bad things happen in life, and how this affects our faith in God. Let's face it, really bad things happen. I mean, bad things, horrible things, things that are hard to even think about, let alone experience. There are times where in life, in the world, there's terrible abuse. So there's parents who are terribly abusive to their children. There's the death of loved ones, which is a trauma that you have to go through to even know what that's really about. There's children who have bone cancer, who are slowly perishing in the hospital. And their parents are praying and praying, and maybe some of them are getting healed, but some of them are not. There's tsunamis, there's natural disasters, there's earthquakes, there's famines, there's all sorts of other things like this. The world has a lot of bad stuff. And so this leads you naturally to ask the question, if God's good, why is there so much bad stuff going on in the world? Some people, they think that there is no God because of this question. They go, well, there is no God. God must not exist. They think it's impossible for God to exist while evil things might be happening somewhere in the universe. If there's evil happening anywhere, it means that God doesn't exist. Other people, they still believe that God exists, but because of this problem of evil, they rebel against God. They shake their fist at God. God, I'm mad at you. You've allowed this stuff to happen, and I judge that you're bad for letting this stuff happen, and they get mad at God.
Yeah, so one thing that's kind of frustrating here, I mean, obviously there are things that are bad in the world, right? No, I don't think anyone denies that. But I think that's what's frustrating for me is that the way he kind of sets it up a little bit is that he's wanting to say, like, I judge that it's bad, right? Or we would judge that it's bad for something. But it's really not about that. I mean, we'll just keep going. But what I'm saying is that something I want everyone to think about it is that we're talking about like models of moral behavior and what would we expect from a morally perfect being. And if a morally perfect being is not acting to some degree on what's right and what's wrong, yeah, that would lead one to question whether this is a morally perfect being or just a moral agent in general.
So you're going to encounter this problem. Either it's going to hit your own heart because you'll struggle with hardship and you'll go, I don't understand. I want to know why. And you might get more and more angry as you ask that question. Or you'll encounter it in the mouths of other people as you're sharing your faith, as you're witnessing, as you're telling people about Jesus, where they might ask you this question: what about the problem of evil? So that's what I want to do today. I want to answer this question. And there are good answers for this question. But I also want to be very open and real and honest with you. I'm not trying to spin anything. I'm not trying to manipulate. I want to be as clear as possible on this subject. So to start with, let me say this. There's two sides of this issue that we got to deal with: the emotional problem and the intellectual problem.
Okay, so this is another thing that I find frustrating with this video is that typically the problem of evil, typically the problem of evil set up into two different camps. He is right about that, but it's not this emotional side versus this intellectual side. I think I'm not going to go into what I think Mike is doing here, but it sounds like if you have a problem, and just because there are emotions that are kind of correlated with that, like moral outrage or something, then you're not justified in coming to the conclusions, right? That seems to be kind of maybe a way he's going about this. But typically in the problem of evil, you have two different camps, or at least two different sides. You have the logical problem of evil, right? That you can put it in the deductive argument, and the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true, right? So that's the logical problem, but there's no emotions involved with it. It's about what entails from a morally perfect agent who is omnipotent and is all powerful, and what are the conclusions that are going to be drawn from that. And if those conclusions are that this God doesn't exist, or that a morally perfect agent isn't compatible with the world that we're viewing, then maybe that agent doesn't exist. Then you also have the evidential problem, which is more of an inductive problem, right? Which is what he's kind of pointing to. While there seems to be apparent evil in the world, you have natural disasters. You have, William Rowe, he wrote on gratuitous evil, but then you also have like Paul Draper, who has written on like that it's more likely to the world that we see is more likely to be indifferent than it is to have a morally perfect agent, something like that. But nowhere in the literature has it ever been found where you have this two problems, this emotional side versus this intellectual side. What I think he wants to do is say that, let's just go with his example, and you'll see how he sets it up.
Emotional problem and the intellectual problem. These are two different sides of the coin dealing with the problem of evil. In fact, at first when I said, if God's good, why do bad things happen? You probably thought, yeah, that's an intellectual problem. But then as I started describing some of the bad things, you started to feel your emotions go out a little, right? Your heart goes out to like this child that might have bone cancer, some terrible thing going on with them. But let me explain to you the difference between the emotional and the intellectual issue. Let's suppose that here you are, you're at church, you're in a Bible study, and I look and I zero in on your face, and my face becomes angry and so mad. And then I look at you, and you can see it in my eyes. You're like, he looks like he's mad at me. And I yell at you, stop it. And you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, and I yell at you again, stop, or I will kill you. And you're like, what? And then I pull out a gun, and I point it at you, and I yell, stop or I'll kill you. And now you're totally freaked out, and then I pull the trigger. Boom! You feel the bullet fly past you as I apparently miss. And you're traumatized. Your heart is pounding, your blood is pumping, you're freaked out. You're like, I knew it. I knew Mike was a psychopath. I knew it this whole time. And you're really freaked out until you look behind you and you see there was a guy coming up behind you with an axe ready to bury it into your head. And you realize that whole time I was yelling at him, protecting you.
Okay, so like going in, this isn't really a great example, although this definitely sets up what he's trying to get at, which is that there's a difference between, like, intellectually you may know something, but then emotionally there's some baggage left over. So like something could be, here's an example, like here's a personal example, right? So like, I was playing with my daughter the other day, actually it's a while ago, and everything that we're doing, all the available evidence to me right in front of me is she's having a good time, she's playing, she's laughing, telling me she loves me. Right, in the back of my mind, though, I was thinking that I'm going to mess this up, right? I'm going to mess up a good time, mess up our quality time together, just like kind of that's just from past childhood where, with my relationship with my own family or my parents where, our quality time always went downhill. And so, so what he's trying to tie into is that intellectually, I may know, like, okay, I'm not messing this up, right? Intellectually, I may know that, but there's this emotional component to it that is kind of leaving this baggage left over. I don't think this quite works when it comes to the problem of evil, like I said, because you have the logical problem of evil where it talks about the properties of God and what do those properties entail, and what would we expect from a morally perfect agent. Versus, so you have that's the logical problem or a problem, and then you have the other problem, which is like we're seeing, evidentially that there's natural disasters, there's cancer. And things that just seem very unnecessary. And why wouldn't a person that has the capability and the power to stop it, is the question. So I don't think this quite works, although I think it's a nice tie-in to I think what he's trying to get at, which is that even though you may emotionally feel a certain way about something, intellectually it shouldn't cause you to doubt God's existence. Anyway, I don't think this is a really good response or a great analogy.
Now, intellectually, you've solved the riddle. But the emotional trauma is not over yet, is it? You're like, I still have that memory of him pointing a gun at me, and I thought I was going to die. You might not even want to talk to me, even though what I did was actually good for you. You might just be like, that guy freaked me out. I saw it in his eyes. He had death in his eyes. It's
There's also another thing that kind of bothers me about this analogy when you start thinking about it and breaking it down. There's one component that's left over. So let's say that is the case, right? Where just take that's how it actually is, right? So you have God, right? That is presumably Mike in this situation, and he is preventing a harm that you just don't understand, right? Until you see the actual evil that was prevented. But the thing is, what happens after the fact? At least the person is still able to talk to Mike, right? Presumably Mike still exists, and he's able to talk to him about this and is able to, come to his own conclusions about what Mike actually did. Where in some cases, God is completely absent of that question, right? That's why you have this emotional problem that he's getting at, is that, you have something that's terrible in your life, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, why is this happening? And you just get no response from it, right? There's a completely different, it's completely disanalogous, right? Even though he's trying to make an analogy from it. At least the person can go and talk to Mike and say, why did you point the gun at me? Yeah, it sucked. Yeah, it scared me. And Mike can be like, look, I was trying to protect you. This is why I was protecting you and did all this X, Y, and Z. Where with God, it seems that you can't do that. maybe they say but they probably say that you would, right? You'd pray, or maybe something, some type of sign would be happening. I'm just saying, like, it's not very clear that, God, you get the saying, right? God works in mysterious ways. It's not very, God's communication isn't always clear.
It's an emotional problem, it's an intellectual problem, and sometimes our emotions don't line up with the truth of things, right? And that's the issue we've got here today. So what I want to do is I want to ask your permission. I want to take you from the feeling level, the emotional level where most of us hang out, and ask you to be on the thinking level, the intellectual level, just for a moment. Let's set us.
There's also this supposition, right, that you being emotional doesn't mean, typically, right, your emotions do tend to cloud judgments at times, but he's also, it's kind of like this, I wouldn't say it's implicitly question baking, but it's more of like, you can still be emotional, right, and still come to sound judgments about things, right? Here's an example, like, you see a child that's about to, go in the street, but then you also see that there's a car coming, right? You may have the emotion of fear, or the emotion of whatever you may be feeling, and then you're going to act on it, right? So there's still an emotion. You can still have an emotional component to a situation and still make a sound judgment off of it. There doesn't seem to be a problem with that. And what he's trying to do is saying, like, no, maybe he's saying that you can't do that. It seems like you can, though. And to put that aside, and then to think about it intellectually, because if you think about it intellectually in the way that he's describing, then you'll come to the same conclusions that he comes to, which is that it's really not a problem.
Your feelings about the problem of evil, and let's talk intellectually about it, and then we'll come back to the emotions later. Let's try to straighten out the intellect, and then we'll try to deal with our emotions. So hopefully I have your permission to do that. Let's set aside for a minute your emotions. Let's talk about what's true. What's true about this evil issue. Now, first off, dealing with the intellectual side, we realize the problem of evil is actually two different problems. And one of them is the problem of moral evil, and the other one is the problem of suffering or pain. Suffering and pain and moral evil, these are two very different issues that are going on. Moral evil is like that person abusing someone else. That's morally evil. Murder, theft, rape. This is moral evil. That's morally wrong. And that's a problem. That's one question. Then there's a separate question that's the problem of suffering or the problem of pain. I have an issue.
Or gratuitous suffering, right? Like having problems with pain isn't always a problem, right? Sometimes, like what he'll kind of go into is that sometimes your pain can be a strength, right? Because you'll learn from something and you'll do all that stuff, right? So sometimes pain and that kind of suffering isn't always bad, I guess that's what he might say. But what more I think most people would say is that, well, like, no, there seems to just be gratuitous suffering or gratuitous pain that has no future purpose, right? Like, no pain, like, surely there's pain out there that you're not going to learn from. There's nothing good ever going to come from this, and surely that seems to be happening. And so that's something that needs to be accounted for on this model of God.
A problem of pain that's been bugging me recently over the past couple of weeks. You see, I don't know why, but when I chew very hard. And every once in a while, my lip decides to, like, commit Harry in my mouth and jump in between my teeth as I'm chewing really hard. And so I will mash down on my lip and hear the cracking and popping of my own physical mouth. And then the blood gushes and stuff. Well, then I've swollen up my mouth because of biting it. So what happens next? I bite it again. I bite it again. And again. I did it again this morning. I did it yesterday. I did it a couple days before that.
You ever have those canker sores? I mean, same thing.
It's been going on for like 2 weeks because I'm an idiot. I keep chewing the same way. Apparently I can't retrain myself. I'm like, oh, gum infection. I'm like, no more gum for me. This is not a problem of moral evil, though, is it? What's that a problem of? Pain. Physical pain. It's a problem. I don't like it. But the physical problem of pain and suffering, this is what connects to things like disease or cancer or natural disasters. A hurricane, that's not a moral evil. It's a suffering problem. It's a pain problem. So suffering or pain is unpleasant. It can even be terrible pain, but it doesn't make it immoral. It doesn't make it immoral. So let's first talk about the moral problem of evil. You see the two problems? Moral evil and pain. Two different issues. So moral evil is real. There is real moral evil out there in the world. This is legitimate. Some people deny this, right? Like there are certain like Eastern religions that will just deny that moral evil even exists.
Right, so if other people will deny it and then he says that it's true, then that's like textbook question baking against these people. You have to argue about why there would be moral evil. But for the sake of argument, whatever, let's just assume that there is moral evil.
They're all pantheism and they don't think that moral evil even happens. But moral evil does happen. And believe it or not, as a Christian, this should strengthen your faith in God. What do I mean? Well, what I mean is this. If moral evil didn't happen, it would be because there was no God. See, if there is no God, there's no moral evil.
Again, he has to argue for this, and he's just not. It's just kind of an assertion that without God there's no moral evil. It's like the Bill Craig kind of argument where like if there is no God, then objective and moral values and duties don't exist. But that's just not true.
No real reason how you can say to somebody, you ought to do this, you ought not to do that. This is morally right, that's morally wrong. So if moral evil...
But again, sorry, this is just the problem that I have with Mike as like someone that tries to study philosophy or just in general that has a liking to this. Like he's just not doing any meta-ethical work here. What does it mean to even say, a moral... When you're making a moral judgment, what are we actually doing? What are we actually doing here? When I say that you should do this or you should do that, what am I actually saying here? Is there any meaning to that? Is that a meaningful statement? And he, instead of just kind of going over that stuff, well, I mean, he has a congregation, so it makes sense to some degree, but still, like, you can't just make these kind of assertions right here without even giving any type of justification for it.
Really exists in the world, then this is actually evidence for God, not evidence against God. Emotionally, it's evidence against God, but not intellectually, not in reality.
Well, it's not even... I mean, just by him saying that... Never mind. Let's just keep going.
If you're an atheist, you have to believe that there isn't any moral evil in the world. So you can't come to God and complain, God, why is there moral evil? Because you don't believe in God or moral evil if you're consistent in your worldview.
Okay, so this is another thing that really bothers me about Mike as well, where he consistently says things like this. If you're an atheist, you have to believe this. It reminds me back when I was in the church where the pastor would say something not similar to this, but would use it with purpose instead and saying like, well, if you're an atheist or if you don't have a belief in God, there's no meaning or life, there's no purpose to life. When that's just not true. I mean, because like there are plenty plausible answers to this on a naturalistic worldview, or if you're an atheist, you can, I think naturalism kind of entails some type of atheism, sure. I mean, a world without any type of supernatural or God in it, but you can be an atheist and still believe in certain things. He actually just admitted it that earlier that you can be a pantheist or whatever, or there are certainly atheistic religions out there that still believe in something like that, right? So you have karma, for example, that isn't strictly, that's not Christian. But again, there's no work to be done. It's just him kind of, I don't know, in some sense, it's like kind of pandering to his audience. Well, if you're an atheist, you can't believe these things. And then that's where you get this constant trope where you get people that are like, well, if you're consistent with your atheism, then you have to believe that no, like murder isn't wrong or rape isn't wrong. And that's just not true. I mean, even if that, let's just say Mike was right, it wouldn't follow then that there isn't any type of norm that people would follow, right? There's still, I mean, there's plausible answers. I mean, there's definitely anti-realists out there or non-cognitivists that are going to say, yeah, it's just our emotion. We're just demonstrating approval or disapproval. And we kind of construct our own morality. We construct it in a way that is, in any way that's going to be conducive to some type of someone's well-being, or just in general, it's not just going to be, like just this willy-nilly, you do what I want and I do what you want. I do what I want and you do what you want. I mean, there's definitely people that do that, right? There's psychological egoism. But at the same time, it's just not true where you have, if you're an atheist, right? So someone can be an atheist and be a moral realist, but they may think that morality comes down to, it can be reduced to natural facts about our biology, our psychology, about our social upbringing, right? There's nothing boiled down. There's nothing that's going to be, there's nothing necessarily inconsistent with that, right? You have, consequentialism, you have Kantianism, Kantianism and consequentialism, they're not grounded in God, right? But they are still objective. And now, I mean, that could be debated, but he's acting as if there's no plausible answer to that if you don't have a God in your life, or if you don't have some type of God belief, that objective morality doesn't exist. And what's further frustrating is that even if, right, and this isn't just my opinion, you can read Richard Swinburne on this, where is that if God, even you can still believe in God, and God can still be beholden to certain moral truths out there, right? So Mike presumably would say that God can't command, God wouldn't command something immoral, right? Because that, for one, that would go against his nature. But also that he can't make something, like if he says the statement, you should murder this person, that statement doesn't become good just because God says it, right? So, and the reason why is because that is a recognition of what is moral, that the moral statement is that you shouldn't kill someone or whatever, pick any type of moral proposition. God would be beholden to that, right? So there are these moral necessary truths that God is still, beholden to, I guess, to some degree, and he, through his commands, makes an obligation for us not to do those things, right? Now, that's not necessarily my view, right? But that's something that Swinburne has argued for and has has said. So, like, even someone that's on his side, that is a Christian philosopher, has said that God would still have to be behind. God still has to abide by these moral necessary truth, the necessary truths out there that are moral, right? So it's not true anyway. Anyway, let's keep going.
You can't be like, it's just wrong. Rape is just wrong. Well, when I see a great white shark on the Nature Channel and it gets together with a female shark, it forces itself upon her. But we don't call this rape. We don't call that because it's forced. We don't call it that. It's just that there's no real moral quality. These are just sharks.
Yeah. So again, with the problem that I have with Mike in particular is that he doesn't do any of the work. Why wouldn't we call that? Like even him, I would bet that he might not say that the shark is actually raping, right? Like, and there's a debate with Shelley Kagan and William Lane Craig where Craig asks him that, like, how do we, like, the separation between us and like just other animals, right? Because we're still animals. And Shelley Kagan had the same response, and this is what happens when you debate an ethicist. What did he say? He's like, well, okay, imagine a scenario where you have a 2-year-old that goes into your house or that goes into Mike's home and starts ripping up his books. You're not going to hold them at the same responsibility or hold them for the same reasons as you would hold an adult. If I went into Mike's room or Mike's house and started tearing up his books, and those reasons are salient to the development of a person, the psychological, the reasons that they're going to be responsive to, their own moral development. Right, the fact that they can perspective take where it's like, okay, like, well, I wouldn't do this because of this and blah blah blah, but like there's completely different. There are reasons why we hold adults to a different standard than we hold children, and right, because we recognize whether we can articulate it properly, but there are reasons why we do that, and these reasons are salient, and those can be done without a God. It doesn't mean that you need a God to do that. And Mike wants to assert that that's the case.
But with people, we see there's a moral element to what we're doing because there's a God who's told us how he wants us to live.
No, it's not that. I mean, one could say that, sure, but that's not the reason why. At least I don't think that would be the reason why. A reason why that we wouldn't do that is because we have the ability to perspective take. We can understand what it's like to feel pain and what it's like to cause suffering on others. And those are reasons enough to not do those things.
So moral evil really is evidence for God.
So no, it's not evidence for God.
If there was no God, there wouldn't be any moral evil.
That's, again, just not true and classic textbook question begging.
But here's the question that I have to struggle with. Is there purpose behind God allowing this moral evil to happen? Is there a reason why God... And I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I think God legitimately allows moral evil to happen in this world. And the first, probably biggest reason is the phrase free will. Free will. Free will is a good thing. Free will is my ability to choose what I'm going to do next. I can choose to keep talking and deliver this message, or I can choose to grab my wallet and go to Krispy Kreme and get a donut. But I will choose wisely. No, I will choose to keep going here, but it's a decision. I don't have to even be here. You didn't even have to show up today. Oh, but my mom made me. Well, you could have stabbed her with a fork and then ran the other way. I mean, you have free will. This is free will that you have. Now, free will is a good thing. Free will is a good thing. I think we agree with this. I like being able to choose things in my life. But there's a problem with free will, and free will is this. It allows evil. You can't really allow true free will without also letting people do wrong things. So evil comes as a...
Okay, so can you really allow freedom in the ultimate sense and still have and not have evil? Yeah, so I'm not quite sure on this question. It's not quite clear that, I mean, there are degrees of freedom, right? I can't be free to just go fly, right? Like, there's certainly psychological and physical facts about myself and about humans that we just can't do anything. So it's not quite clear that, what I'm saying is that there's limitations to freedom. So it doesn't seem implausible that God could just literally just, I wouldn't say necessarily like limit our freedom, but if he did limit our freedom, I don't see that to be a problem. Because you certainly can do that. And it's certainly not a problem, right? So someone can still make the choice, right? So let's say I take a gun and I go, and about to shoot someone. God could allow me to do those things up to the point where I'm shooting the gun and I shoot the gun and the gun just malfunctions or the bullet just doesn't go anywhere, right? That's not restricting my freedom. I'm still making that choice in the way Mike is wanting to say that we're making the choice. But like there's no restriction there. God could still do something like that. At least that it's clear to me that, or at least it's not unclear why he wouldn't. Also, too, when it comes to freedom, Mike is saying that he's making choices, but what is he giving for his choices for why he does one decision over another one? It's particularly because it's for reasons, right? So these reasons, in some sense, are influencing or determining what he's going to do next, right? Like he's not just doing things with no explanation. There's at least an explanation for it. That doesn't seem to be contradictory, right, to any type of notion, even if we were determined. Okay, let's keep going. I lost my train of thought.
Consequence of God letting us make decisions, letting us have free will.
Oh, as well as free will. Yes, that's what I remember. Okay, so what he's wanting to say is that, okay, presumably, like if there's an afterlife where we're living in a heaven, right? This is kind of something that's been brought up before, right? Problem. God could make us in such a way where we just never choose to do the wrong thing. We're just kind of we have the right moral development to where we always choose the right thing, right? That's not restricting of our freedom. And this goes into the classic like compatibilist like Frankfurt cases where it's like, I could have, even if I'm not aware that I can't make another choice, is that going to be a necessary or even sufficient condition for me not being free, right? If I always choose to do one thing, right, it doesn't seem like that would be incompatible with me not actually being free to make that choice, even though I would never choose otherwise, or I wouldn't choose a different choice. I hope that makes sense, but all I'm saying is that it seems plausible that God could create moral beings that always do not always do the right thing, but maybe 95% of the time or 99% of the time do the morally right thing. But that wouldn't, because of our development in that way, it wouldn't break freedom or our free will.
Free will's good. Robots don't compare to people. Imagine if you had your best friend and it's a robot. Now, I know that there are some people on Earth whose best friend really is a robot. That's sad. Like, we all know that's really pathetic, right? That's not how it's supposed to be. People are different than robots. So this
sure might be pathetic, but like at the same time, like why is that the case? Like why would someone have only friends that are robots? Maybe there's something going on with that person. I don't know. Maybe that's worth exploring about why they would feel the need to have a friendship with a robot instead of an actual another human being.
Actually answers the question of who made evil, because maybe that's on your mind too. Who made evil? Who created evil? Well, but evil wasn't created then. If evil is just me being allowed to decide to do things that are not right, then God didn't have to make evil. He simply had to give us free will, and we made the evil. When Cain chose to kill Abel, he created that evil situation, the first murder. So the first reason there's purpose behind free will is, the purpose behind evil rather, is because God allows us to have free will. The second one is connected to free will, but it's different than free will. It's the concept of love. Love is arguably the greatest good there is on earth. Love, man. People loving each other, people loving God, God loving people. Imagine if you...
Yeah, so it's not quite clear if love really is the greatest thing above all. I mean, perhaps it is. I mean, I would need more time to think about that. I feel like there's other competing things, right? So it's like someone in some sense would say like, what the best thing or the greatest thing is is happiness, right? And like that's the end all be all thing where, it's not quite clear that happiness would be, I mean, certainly there's a qualitative experience to having pleasurable things in your life and being happy. But it doesn't seem like that would be something to be the highest thing to be achieved. Because I feel like Mike and I feel like other probably Christian apologists would say like, well, like another great thing, right, is to be in situations that allow you to triumph, right, over the evil, or thinking about like, when you're faced with something where you have to be brave, right? That seems like a really great thing to do, or to be good at. I don't know, to be the exemplar of bravery. That seems to be a good thing. Now, is there such? I don't know. I have to think more about this. I don't know if there's a hierarchy of like goods, right? I kind of am more on the lines of thinking that like there's just a plurality of goods, and they're not necessarily hierarchical. I mean, maybe in some sense they are. Maybe in some situations they're going to be a little bit more weightier. But I don't know. It's not quite clear that love is actually the greatest good.
Take the earth and just remove love. All love gone. What's the point? What's the point? I mean, love is a great...
Well, I mean, like, there's plenty of other points, right? Let's say you were to move the love I mean, it's not quite clear what he means by love either. It's not quite clear that love is just an emotion. There's definitely there's a concept of love that we have, but it seems like we do, like, for example, someone could be grieving from a lost one because they love them, right? So it doesn't seem like love is just like this attraction to a person, or just like a good feeling. It seems like people can grieve or have, negative feelings, or just, and I mean negative in the sense of like just not pleasant feelings, like sadness or something like that, because they love someone, right? That's where we have grief, right? People that grieve over things because they loved a person, and they lost a loved one, or they deeply cared about him. So it's not quite clear what he means by love. I mean, maybe he explains it, so I'll just keep going.
Good. But imagine if I could design for you your perfect girl or guy, and then they would love you. Guaranteed they would love you. In fact, it's programmed into their DNA. They have to love you. They have no choice. No matter what you do, they like it. No matter how bad your joke is, they laugh at it. This is the perfect person physically and character-wise and all this good stuff that you like, but they have no free will. They never choose to love you. It's just automatically programmed in. Do you like that? You're like, what's the point? What's the point, man? If you don't get to choose to care about me, then how are you really caring about me? So, love needs free will. And to say, I want to get rid of free will, and then I also want to get rid of love so that I can get rid of evil, is itself really kind of sad. And it's unfortunate. It's a good reason to allow moral evil is to create the opportunity for.
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily a good reason to allow moral evil. I mean, I didn't really see anything back to what he was talking about. I guess I have to quite think about it, where it's like, what's the point? I mean, there's other points to being in a relationship besides loving the person, right? I mean, unless Mike wants to say that any type of relationship is reductive, is identical to love, which is a very strong claim. I don't think he can make that kind of claim, because there's certain different aspects of a relationship rather than just loving the person. So maybe the person was forced. I'm kind of you can think of family members, right, that are forced essentially to love their brother or their sister, but like it's not really there, like, because maybe they don't really love them, but there may be other aspects to the relationship that they do favor. Maybe they have a lot of things in common or something like that. But yeah.
The third reason is this: purpose behind God allowing evil is, and this will make sense to someone who loves God. It will be confusing to someone who does not, but it's this: it's God's glory. God's glory.
Yeah. So I think he's gonna say that it's God's glory, because when you're placed in a moral situation, you have the opportunity to exercise the free will and to do something that's moral.
God judges moral evils, and this is a good thing. We want him to judge. We feel it in our gut that sin and moral evil is asking for judgment. Like God said to Cain about murdering his brother Abel, he goes, his blood cries out to me. It cries out for judgment. It cries out for justice. And just like in a movie, the bad guy sort of lets the good guy show his colors. Imagine watching the movies you've seen and take the bad guy out of the equation. Well, maybe there wouldn't be a movie. It wouldn't be there. But there's the bad guy allowing the good guy to show his colors. And there's an element of this in God allowing evil. God can bring good through judging and show his goodness and his glory and his righteousness by being the hero saving the day and doing things right. Now, that's just one reason. It's not the whole reason, but that's one. And then number 4, the fourth reason I have here is there purpose behind God allowing evil. And I think you'll appreciate this one very personally. Let's suppose for a second that God were to stop all evil. And God just said, no more evil, boom, and he stopped all evil. Well, how does he do this? Well, it's easy. He just looks around the universe, and he looks at every possible source of evil, and he eradicates it, he destroys it, he annihilates it. Would you enjoy that universe after all the sources of evil were annihilated? Why wouldn't you enjoy it? You wouldn't be in it. You are a source of evil.
Yeah, so, again, it's not quite clear. I'm probably going to say that multiple times, about the annihilation of a person just because of the evil, if it was to be eradicated. Because, I mean, okay, there's a couple of things. Going back to what he was saying, that we have the right to exercise free will. So he says that we create evil. So if we do like an evil act, right, the evil act isn't there until it's kind of essentially made. So I don't know. It's kind of weird to say that, evil is made in that sense, but then he's also going to say that we're the source of it. It doesn't seem like you can have it both ways, where you're the source but also creating it. I mean, if we also create goodness, then wouldn't we be, and therefore, the source of goodness as well? But maybe he would say that we're not. But if we're, like, that's what I'm saying. So you have two different features, right? You have a situation where you're going to do evil and another situation you're going to do good, right? Both are created by the human or by the person's choice, and they're also the source of it. So it's not quite clear that, like, we would be the source of that evil or the source of that good, because, I mean, it kind of conflicts with God's nature if he's the source of all goodness, right? So I don't know. It's kind of a weird reason why God would allow evil.
I am a source of evil. I've done evil things. I've done wrong things. And if God were to really just drop the hammer and bring judgment right now and stop all sources of evil, he'd stop all human beings. So it is God's...
And it kind of seems like he wouldn't have to do that, right? I mean, he also could just make us reasons responsive, or just have it in our moral development that we're going to do only good. It doesn't seem like we have to do what he's wanting us to do. Oh, hold on 1 second. Oh. All right, let's see how we're doing. All right.
Grace upon us that it allows us to continue existing and continue going. Now, God has a limit to this. He's not going to let it go on forever, and he doesn't let people get away with anything they want. There's some limits that he places. We look at God's judging cities and worlds in the past, like Noah.
Yeah, and I mean, so like in one sense, we're talking about like this kind of like the philosopher's God, right? This abstract, not necessarily an abstract entity, but something that, you know, that's a God, and then he's applying it to, you know, like the Bible, right? Because he's a Christian. But yeah, like there's certainly, God places limits, right? So if God can place limits, that, you know, he obviously has reasons to do it. So it's not quite clear why he just doesn't do other things too. And it makes it seem it's either one, very arbitrary about when God decides to intervene, but also kind of like, do we have to have this amount of evil to bring about a certain end, right? You kind of, you know, start thinking about that kind of stuff.
The flood destroying the earth. God's like limiting the wickedness of man, but he's allowing them to exist because he's giving them.
But we're allowed to have freedom. It doesn't make sense, right? I guess he might make like a parent analogy, but I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me, where I'm going to allow someone to have freedom and free will, and I'm going to judge them in the afterlife, apparently, but I'm also going to arbitrarily like place limits upon the freedom that they're exercising.
Time to repent and come to Christ. So,
well, he might not say they're arbitrary, but certainly seems to be the case.
Stopping evil means stopping us, and that's the fourth reason, is out of care for us, God lets us continue. So that's moral evil. I think, in all honesty, it's not that hard to show that moral evil can exist while God exists. He just gives us free will, and then he works good through the things that are going on. It shows his judgment. It's time for us to repent, to get saved, all these different good things that are coming out of this. Moral evils are caused by free will agents, people, and those people are responsible for their acts. God is not responsible for their actions. They have free will. And God has a good reason to allow it, and he limits it to some degree. So I personally, I'm satisfied with that intellectually.
Yeah, I know that he thinks he's satisfied, or he believes he's satisfied with that. I'm still not satisfied with that, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why. I don't know how much time I have left on the stream, but one of the things that I find frustrating is that when we talk about, okay, take a step back. What does it mean to have evidence of a particular phenomenon or just a particular thing? When you're looking at, I think it's because evidence is something that would be expected on a given phenomenon, right? That's something that you're trying to explain. So here's something that would be the case. What would we expect, and what would be the evidence of someone that is a moral agent? Well, it seems to be the case, right, that a moral agent would be someone who does things that are moral, right? You know, it seems kind of obvious, but also has the right values, values the right things, comes to right sound conclusions or judgments about a given moral situation, and then acts upon those. And he not only, right, that's something that we would expect from a moral agent to do. Now, what would we expect from a non-moral agent? So someone that is just amoral, right? Someone who probably just doesn't care. They're indifferent to a lot of things. They show no judgment, right or wrong. And then you have like the immoral person, right? What would you expect from an immoral person? Well, you'd expect them to do the wrong things, not all the time, but you'd expect them to do the wrong things, to make wrong conclusions about things, come to do and perform evil acts, whatever. Okay, right. So in those three models of what we mean by like an immoral agent, what would we expect God to be? Well, we would expect God, right, to have the moral perfection that he's been, that he has the properties of. So what does that mean? Okay, well, if you were to place a moral, and you take a situation and you take those three models, and then we can derive a situation to where there's a moral judgment that needs to be placed. Well, what would we expect from all three of those models? Well, we would expect the moral agent to act morally. We would expect the amoral agent to not care or to be indifferent, and we would expect the immoral agent to act immorally. Okay, now that's what we would expect from them, and then we would see what would happen, and then that would be evidence of whether they are a moral agent, a non-moral agent, or an immoral agent, right? So what I'm saying, how does this all tie in? Well, it ties into God. If he's defined as this, not defined, but if he has the properties of moral perfection, well, we would expect God to act in a moral situation. And not only would we expect him to act in that situation, we would expect him to also come to the right conclusions about how to come to the right moral, we would expect him to come to the right moral judgments. If he doesn't do any of those things, then he may not be a morally perfect being. Now, of course, you can still have a God that is a moral God, but maybe he's just not moral all the time, right? That doesn't break that, the non-existence of God. I'm just saying that what would we expect? And as far as I can tell, what we currently see is that a God that's not acting. If this God is not acting, then maybe he's not as morally perfect as we think we are. He is not as morally perfect as we think he is. All right, what time is it? Okay. Let's continue going. I got a couple more minutes. Let's see.
In my brain. So the second question is this. That's moral evil. What about suffering? What about pain? What about cancer and tornadoes and hurricanes? What about people who fall into quicksand? What about various different non-moral suffering? Is there purpose behind suffering? And I think that there's several things where there's purpose behind suffering. One of them is this. The first one. Suffering leads to lessons that we learn. Character transformation. Personal change that happens because I go through pain.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not going to deny that. I think people can go through experiences and learn from them and be a better person from it, no doubt. But that also, there's certainly situations where there are people that are placed into situations where no good will ever come from it, So I don't think this is a good response to why to allow natural evil, but
it wakes me up. It gets me asking deep questions. I remember hearing the story of Bethany Hamilton. She's a pro surfer who.
All right, let's go a little bit more through this. Let's see. He's going to go.
The lessons are temporary. The pain is temporary, but the lessons you learn from them are permanent. It has happened. But the world in life is a lot bigger than you and me. And this butterfly effect is basically saying, God, I know that there's a lot of things in motion in the world, and this pain and suffering could be causing all sorts of different things to happen that I do not know about. And then number sixth reason why we see pain and suffering in the world is because we're in a fallen world. We're in a fallen world. Oh, I was such a fool. I spoke words without knowledge. I wanted to know why. But who was I to think that God had to explain himself to me? You can give me the rebuttal after I've shared all this stuff with you, okay? And then we'll talk about emotions in a second. It goes like this. If God is all good, God would want to stop evil because he's good. Make sense? Then they say this. If God is all powerful, then he can stop evil. He has the ability to stop evil because he's so powerful. Does that make sense? Then they conclude this. Evil hasn't stopped. Therefore, either God is not good or God is not all powerful or there is no God. Anybody think that maybe you could think of a honest, rational way to respond to that? Go ahead and take a moment to think about it. If God's all good, he wants to stop evil. If he's all powerful, he can stop evil. Evil hasn't stopped. God must not be good. God must not be powerful, or simply doesn't exist at all.
It's not that God is not good. It's just that he's not all good, or like good all the time, or like morally perfect. Someone can still be good, right? And just eventually, things are going to go awry, right? I mean, you can think of like a good car, right? Eventually it's going to break down. Or, you can think of like someone's good maybe 80% of the time. Like, it doesn't seem like God it wouldn't be like, therefore he's not all good. It's just, yeah, he's not morally perfect. That's what it seems like it would be. He could still be a good God that's still entirely compatible.
Yeah.
They rule out if he wants to stop evil right now.
Yeah. There's one word that you can add at the very end of the argument. If God's all good, he would want to stop evil. I agree. If he's all powerful, he can stop evil. I think I agree with that too. Yeah. Evil hasn't stopped yet. See, what the thing assumes, it assumes that right now is the way things have been, are, and it will always be. But if they wait, I don't know, 10 minutes till Jesus comes back, or 1,000 years, or whatever it's going to be, then they won't be able to ask this argument because it will have been stopped. Sir?
That's if it has been. I mean, I don't know. I don't think anyone has the computational power to actually come to those conclusions. So I don't know. I feel like that's just not really a good response. But anyway, that's all the time I have today. Yeah, goodbye.